guys, and welcome to another video. My name's Mark Parham. I'm an entrepreneur and property investor, and today is a bonus video because I put a poll out on YouTube and about 50% of you wanted me to do the video that I released yesterday, the 5 habits of a millionaire, and the other 50% wanted me to do this video, which was the secret problem with property education. So I decided, why not film both? So today is the bonus video, and I'm going to be going through the dirty secrets of the property education sector. And this isn't to point fingers or names at anybody, but to just go through some things observationally that I've noticed that I think you should be aware of. So let's get into the video and let's go on to number 1, my first problem with the property education sector. So my first problem with the property education sector is people who are not qualified to either teach or in the subject matter they are teaching. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I've noticed people who maybe have bought 1 or 2 houses and suddenly, and sometimes in some instances, no houses, and they're setting up property education businesses like they understand the process. They haven't been through a recession, they haven't been through the process, they haven't seen it when it goes well, when it goes badly, how to react to different scenarios. It's really important that if you're going to be educated by someone, that individual is an expert on the subject matter that they're educating you on. And I feel like there are an abundance of people who are just trying to make a quick buck out of selling information that they themselves may have just been sold and not actually learnt and been through the process of. So my first issue is very much that there are uneducated people becoming educators, and I don't think that that's helpful. So guys, number 2, my second point is I've got a couple of people who are very close to me who are senior in education. One is my mum, who helped develop policy for the UK, and the second is one of my good friends who helps develop the education for the military. Now, we had good conversations about the size of classes, and in some instances, some training providers are doing 1 trainer to hundreds of delegates. Now, this isn't training or education in my mind. This is information selling, which is absolutely fine, but it's not education. You wouldn't send your child to a class of 1,000 people or 300 people, would you? We send our children into class sizes of 30 because that's about the maximum that people can do 1 to many. In private school, it's 1 to 15 because that's the optimum number for having a group that can still work together, but the teacher having enough one-to-one time with each pupil. Now, if you can imagine, I wouldn't put my child into an environment where their educator was, I don't know, this far away from them, would I? Or I wouldn't go this far away, guys, a big conference centre. Honestly, I'm going to be able to teach you from over here. And like and subscribe, guys. I forgot to say, like my video and give me a subscribe. Class size, guys, I think is really key. I personally think that if you're doing education, 1-to-1 is 1-to-1. 1 to a few is 1 to 15. 1 to many, less than 50. I think beyond that, it becomes entertainment rather than education. So guys, let's talk about the third problem. This is the unattainable dream. Now, the big problem I have with this, I was speaking to a company very recently in the last week who was selling a deal sourcing masterclass. I can't remember exactly what it's called, deal sourcing course, deal sourcing something. The reality was they were going to teach me in exchange for a few £100 how to become a deal sourcer. And they were saying that, you know, they're going to do about 100 of these a month. Now, I quickly did some maths in my head to try and work out whether there was going to be a demand in the UK property market for 100 deal sourcers a month. Let's go and find out. Let's go and have a look at the whiteboard and see exactly what that looks like if we start scaling that up over the next year with one company training 100 people a month. Come on. Guys, we're here in the studio. I'm just going to get my glasses off because things are getting serious, and we've got 100 new deal sources every month, and this is just one company, okay? So I think it's prudent, the first thing for us to do is have a look and see how big the buy-to-let or the investor sector is when it comes to housing, so that we can understand how big the market is. So first of all, let's have a look at the size of the entire housing market every month per transaction, and then let's have a look at the size of the investor side of that and get a good idea for what we're going to be selling into and what market and demand there is for these 100 people per month if one company was to provide that sort of number. So let's have a look at that quickly. So a very brief bit of information, looking at the ONS, we can see that there's an average of about 100,000 transactions in the property sector per calendar month. Now, I've also had a quick look to get a good idea, to have a look at the number of buy-to-let mortgages that were approved. Now, I can't get the number of buy-to-let transactions because that doesn't actually tell me that anywhere, but I can get buy-to-let mortgages, and in August of 2019, there were 5,900, and that was at a peak. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that between 5 and 6% of this 100,000 is going to be buy-to-let owners. So we could say there's 5,000 to 6,000 people who are buying as a buy-to-let investor. Now the next thing for us to do is have a look at how many cash transactions there are as a percentage of this, and we can probably try and work out roughly, and I accept this is not going to be exact, but we can work out roughly how many transactions we think the investment sector is responsible for on a monthly basis. So let's have a quick look at that. So I've got the research in front of me, and it would see that about 30% of purchases are in cash. A lot higher than I thought, to be honest. So about 30,000 of this 100,000 purchases per month are in cash. But 68% of those are with people who are going to be living in the house rather than people who are going to be buying as investors. So we can say that 30,000, so having done some quick maths, 30,000 purchases per month are in cash. About 68% of those are homeowners, so that's 20,400, which leaves 9,800 as people who didn't state why they were buying it or stated that they were investors. So we know that that's the size of the potential investment pot, and that includes auctions, which runs at between 3,000 and 5,000 auction properties per month. So you can kind of see that that probably sits, I would think, about right, and we're starting to get figures of between 10 and 15,000 investment properties being purchased every month. And I think, by my gut, that that sounds about right. 100,000 homes being purchased every month, and about 10% of those to 15% being for investors. So we've got a mean of about 12,500 investment properties being purchased every month, of which we know between 4,000 and 5,000 are auction purchases. Now, I think it's really unlikely that many deal sources are purchasing from auction. Having spoken to a lot of deal sources recently and in the past, it's very few of them that are attending auctions and purchasing from there on behalf of investors, mainly because of the nature of auctions, okay? So we can probably discount that 4,000 odd properties from this number as our potential pool of properties that we could source from, which leaves us about 8,000 transactions per month. The next thing we need to do is work out exactly how many of those transactions the investor would be open to using a deal sourcer and paying £2,000 or £3,000 to. I think that's quite a hard number to come to, so I'm going to say that at least half of them won't be. And I think that's reasonable to say. And, you know, let me know in the comments if you don't think that's reasonable. But I think at least half of these transactions, they will not be open to using a deal sourcer, which leaves us approximately a pool of 4,000 transactions to go for per month. Now we've got to work out how many deal sourcers could operate within that pool. So we know that a deal sourcer needs between 2 and 4 deals per month to keep their head above water, to pay the bills, to make a bit of profit, all the rest. So if we said 3, that would be reasonable, okay? So we'll divide that by 3, and to be honest, I think this 4,000 is a high number, but we're going to divide it by 3 anyway. I think this is more like, I think this is more like 800. I don't think the pool is 4,000. I don't know how else to say this without swearing. But I don't think it's 4,000. I think it's more like 800. But I'm going to be very, very, very generous to these training companies and say it's 4,000 transactions. So that means that we could have a potential pool of 1,333 deal sources in the UK operating at any one point in time. Now, the company that I spoke to, who said they were going to train 100 deal sources a month, they weren't the largest and they weren't the only one. Within a year, they would have fulfilled the entire requirement for the market. Now, if you look at the number of property transactions over the last 10 years, this is not a rising market significantly. You could not say that in a year's time we can double the number of transactions. In 4 years' time we could quadruple the number of transactions. It's not that much of a rising market. And the supply side, you're not going to be making more deals just magic out of thin air and selling those on. So honestly, I don't see there being 1,333 deal sources operating in the UK. I think that number's far, far less, and I think by training another 100 every month, this other company is massively oversupplying. And from the conversations I've had with deal sourcers who aren't selling deals, I would think that's the norm rather than the exception. I think there are far more people who fail than there are that succeed. And whether that's a reflection on the training or a reflection of the market is for you to decide. But for me, as a capitalist, as somebody who just observes and comments, I think this is an unattainable dream for most people. If you're going to be adding that amount of supply every month, I can't see it ever working out. And my last point, guys, is very much around the fact that I don't believe that people should be going into debt, and significant amounts of debt in some instances, to get this sort of information. For the majority of people, you can find out enough in books and on YouTube for you to be able to start your journey. And if it's working out for you at that point, by all means, spend thousands of pounds on getting educated. Now, here's a good example. I started my YouTube channel back in January. I didn't bring Nick on until March. I had to prove the concept first. I had to prove that it was going to work. I had to see a route to profitability before I would invest further. And most businesses do the same. They look for a route to profitability before they even start investing in the execution side of things significantly. So guys, let's quickly recap. Firstly, I don't think uneducated people who haven't done many transactions or have only been in the industry a short space of time, should be teaching anything. I think it's really, really important that you make sure that if you are going to pay someone to educate you, that that person has experience in the subject that you're trying to learn about. Number two, I think class sizes should be limited. I don't think that an education settings where it's 1 to 100, 1 to 1,000 is actually education. I would never send my child to a school where it was that sort of ratio. So I think you need to be very, very careful about class sizes. Number three, I think the unattainable goal of everybody becoming a deal sourcer is just completely that, unattainable. I speak to so many people who have failed at this, and that's because the UK market can just not absorb that level of supply of deal sourcers. There isn't a demand. And number four, so please, please, please really consider your position before you go into debt for any of these companies. I think for the majority of people, you can find enough information online to prove the concept, to make sure that you're going in the right direction before you have to make that sort of investment. So guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've been Mark Parham. This was your bonus. I'll see you again on Wednesday.